In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. You've come to know by now that I like movies, and one of my favorite movies is the movie Lincoln that Steven Spielberg made some years ago. A very powerful testimony to the life of our 16th president who did so much for our country, and there's a very powerful scene. The whole movie takes place in just a few months when Lincoln is trying to pass the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery in America once and for all. And there's a scene in which he's gathered around the table with his cabinet, and they're giving him all the reasons why this is the worst time in the world to do this. The war, trying to get the Civil War ended, all these other things going on, and he finally says, I can't listen to this anymore. And he pounds on the table, and he points at them one at a time, and he says, I want to do this now, now, now. We heard that message not in a historical movie. We heard that message given to us by the Spirit of God through the words of the Apostle Paul, heard in the voice of our reader this morning. St. Paul, writing to the Corinthians and to us, says, at the acceptable time I have listened to you and helped you on the day of salvation. Now, what you may not know, he's quoting Isaiah, the prophet. Those words written hundreds of years before. But this is how St. Paul continues in his own words. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. When you and I think of salvation, if we were to think of a time, we think off there in the future. Yeah, we give lip service, we say we don't really know when, but salvation someday is off down the road. St. Paul tells us very clearly in today's epistle, now is the day of salvation. What does that mean for us? Well, we know in very general terms there's no time like the present. We know in sort of cultural ideas that, yeah, the present is important. But when St. Paul says to us, now is the day of salvation, we need to be listening much, much more closely. The gospel gives us an example of how this works out. Today's gospel is that well-known parable. 3 servants are called together by the master of the estate, and he gives them talents that he's entrusting with. This is his stuff. A talent at that time was a unit of money. It was a weight, typically of gold, maybe of silver, but it was a lot of money. A talent was a lot. And he gives to these 3 servants a set of talents. He gives to the first 5, the second he gives 2, and the third he gives 1. He says, I'm going away, and when I come back, I want to see what you've done with what I give you. And you know the story. He comes back, and the first 2 had doubled theirs, and the last one had hit it on the ground. It's a good example for us of the importance of now, because the first 2 understood it. The first 2 understood instinctively, if my master is giving me something now, I better do something with it now. And they did, both doubling what he had given them. The third servant is the warning to all of us. He does what we all do way too often. He first of all loses himself in the past. He says, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you didn't sow. In other words, the master was one who would take gains even if he wasn't the one to sow that seed. He wanted the harvest. And this man looked back in fear at the hardness of his master. And he also looked forward. He said, boy, he's going to come back. He's going to want to know what I've done with the 1 talent he gave me. And he wasn't all that concerned with the fact that he only had 1. He could have been. Could have said, why did that guy get 5? Why did that guy get 2? He only got 1. But even with that lower level of responsibility, all he could do was look to the past at what his master had done and look to the future when that master would come back and say, where's what you've done with what I have? What have you done with it? And in fear of that future moment, in the now he was given, he took that talent and he buried it in the ground. That's a good example for us when we don't understand the power of the present. And you and I do this all the time. We look back, sometimes with nostalgia, and we long for days gone by. Sometimes we look back with regret. I wish it wouldn't have been like this. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish someone would have done this. I wish it could have been differently. But whether through nostalgia or regret, looking to the past can be a temptation. There's a measure at which it's okay. Nice to remember things. God gives us our memory in order to recall things. We can even look back and see where we've made mistakes in order to make better decisions in the present. But that temptation to put too much attention on the past, either from nostalgia or from regret, is just that. It's a temptation. And likewise, we have that other temptation, to spend our attention looking forward. Maybe it's with hope. Nothing wrong with hope. Hope's a good thing. But too much attention on the hope for the future takes our energy from the one time we can do anything about realizing or receiving that future. And that moment is now. Likewise, we can look to the future with fear. How much have we done this in the last year, all of us at different times, wondering what's going to happen? And in fear of what may happen in the future, we get paralyzed in our now. And so today, St. Paul, being the voice of the Spirit, is calling us back to this one most important moment, and that moment is now. Tomorrow we'll have other moments that are tomorrow's now. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with planning for a future, just like there's nothing wrong with looking back and reflecting on the past. It's when we put so much attention on those that we neglect the present. So what can we do? We can decide to do something. And as you may have guessed, the time to do something is now. Now, now, now. What are those things? What are the things that we need to think about doing with the gift that is the present moment? Well, we all struggle with our spiritual habits. We all wish we prayed more, read the Bible more, would fast more strongly, would attend more services, would be more kind to those in need. And we've had regrets about those things in the past, what we haven't done, and we've made plans for the future. The time to change those things is now. This time of year, in the next few weeks, we're going to be hearing Gospels preparing us for Lent. And one of the temptations we're going to face in the next few weeks is, when Lent comes, ... Now, again, nothing wrong with a little planning. But if we get the message that now is the time to do nothing and wait for then, we're hearing the wrong message. God is calling us to change now, because he's giving this present moment as the gift from him that it is. What else can we do now? We've talked about this before. Now is the moment to forgive. Whatever anyone has done to us, no matter how long ago it was, no matter how deeply we were hurt, the moment to forgive them isn't, well, I'm going to think about it. No, it's now. Now, now, now. It's the only moment we can do anything about. We may have future nows to do something about it, but we don't know. There's no guarantees. If you learned anything good from this past year, learn this. There are no guarantees. A year and a few days ago, we didn't know we'd be living like this, all coming to church with masks on. We would have said, what a crazy idea. So we don't know about the future. What we do know is we have now. And whatever we've been holding on to, whatever grudges, whatever even partial aspects of forgiveness, we've given some, but not all of it. Now we can give it all. Wipe the debt completely, the slate completely clean. How can we do that? Because God gives us power now. We'll talk about that in a moment. For some of us, we've wrestled with sins, habitual sins, sins that just seem so deep within us that it's hard for us to even imagine a life without them. You know when we can change? You guessed it, now. Now can be the moment that we stop. No matter how long, no matter how difficult the struggle is, we can stop now. Doesn't mean the struggle is going to end now. It just means now we make the decision and then we work for it. But how? How can we end habits that sometimes are years or decades in the making? How can we let go of grudges that are sometimes years or decades in the making? How can we make spiritual changes in our life that sometimes we've been waiting years or decades to do? This is how. We can do it now because God is with us now. For several years, we had a wonderful Bible verse at the top of our minds because it was a theme of our convention. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And we can do them now because He strengthens us. There is nothing we need that God hasn't given us now to make whatever changes He's calling us to make. There's no aspect of strength. There's no skill we haven't learned yet. It's simply the will and the decision to accept it now. You see, God is eternal. Meaning, for God, every moment of human history and every moment before and beyond history is to God now. But you and I are not God. We are not divine. We are called to join with Him. But you and I, being creatures of this world, parts of His creation, we exist in that line of eternity, but only one moment at a time. And you guessed it. When is that moment? Now. In other words, we can only meet God now. We can think back to moments where God reached out to us. We can hope for those in the future. We can even prepare ourselves better now for those in the future. But we can only meet Him now. Someday He'll bring us into eternity, and every moment will be now for us. But not yet. For now, we meet Him now. And only now. And that's how now is the time that we could do everything God has called us to do. Because it doesn't say do it and then send us off. He gives us what we need. Notice when He gave, in the parable, when the master gave what was his to the servants, He gave what was his. He didn't just say, go make some money. He said, here's 5 talents. They weren't the servants. They were the masters. When He gave the 5, the 2, and the 1, they were His. God begins with what is His and then says to us, now you go do something with it. So whatever we need to do, God has already given us what we need to do to achieve it. Many of us will be gathering around our televisions this afternoon, this evening to watch a Super Bowl. We don't know who's going to win. We know one thing we know. Somebody's going to win, and someone's going to lose. Tomorrow, the news will be filled with all the stories of the winners and the losers both. In the calling that God gives us, when He says that now is the day of salvation, none of us need lose. Not one of us need to lose. But there's only one way we can lose, and that is by not accepting the gift that is now. I said it before and I'll say it again. The present is a gift. You know what I did there? The present, gift, a present, you unwrap a present. The present is a gift. Stick that in your heads. Put it in your hearts. The present is a gift. Because now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. Now. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.